As I've been introduced, my name is Nir Chervoni, head of data security at Booking.com. Also, in my previous position, acted as the CISO of a big fintech company in Europe. And I'm going to talk today about data security posture management together with my partner, Johnny. Johnny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hi, everyone. I'm Johnny. I've been doing cybersecurity the last 15 years or so. In my past experience, I've led investigations after data breaches of Fortune 500 companies. I did incident response. And today I'm the CEO of Flow Security, which provides a data security platform.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the agenda for today would be a review of what data security posture management is, including of multiple aspects and prisms. Then I'm going to review the problem statement, touching multiple angles of it. Afterwards, I'm going to review the inherent data risks, but also I'm going to touch upon different relevant controls per different risk. Later, we're going to review the data challenge, mainly from the risk prism, but we will also try to explain why data risk is different than any other IT domain risks. Afterwards, John is going to provide a deep sneak peek into the holistic data security approach. And lastly, we're going to provide conclusions and key takeaways to wrap up everything. Okay, data security posture management. What does it mean? According to Gartner's 2022 hype cycle for data security posture management provides visibility as to where your sensitive data is, who has access to it, how it's being used, and what the security posture of your data store or application is. The definition that I would like to review and to state is that data security posture management is an approach which focuses on reducing risks, mainly focusing on data, whether it's being stored, transmitted, or being used, and taking into consideration the new challenges of today's world. In more details, I would say that it's about classifying and discovering data, whether it's being used, transmitted, or stored, but in a more effective way, and I'm going to reach to that in a moment. It's also about having detection and response capabilities, but in a way that considering today's challenges with the new environments and the new dynamics of data. But it's also about automating the aforementioned processes so you can practically reach an effective implementation, as I've already mentioned with the new dynamics of data. And by saying new dynamics of data, I mainly mean to things like the fast data growth in general and the fast migration to data to the cloud, which creates a lot of challenges when it comes to data security. Talking through the problem statement, I think I'll start with the fact that in today's world, data is fragmented over thousands of application data stores and SaaS providers. In simple words, I can just say the data is everywhere and in a big matter. Also, the unique characteristic and behavior of data in cloud environments increase the risk of breaches, unauthorized access, and data exfiltration, as it's now easier to expose data and misuse it. Developers has more accessibility to production environments in general and production data in specific. I don't think that that risk or that threat got increased, but the risk itself and the risk level got increased mainly because of the growth of the volumes of data and the business impact as a result of a given breach. And lastly, fast migrations to cloud, as I've already mentioned, creates higher probability for misconfiguration. By the way, the misconfiguration that I mainly talk about is around access control and key management, which will eventually increase the risk of data breach. Now, before I'm diving into the inherent data risk, maybe it's worth to have some alignment in the room of what inherent risk is, or what's the definition of inherent risk. So inherent risk, it's mainly about a risk that have no controls and no attempt of mitigations. After explaining that part, I'll start with the first risk, which is about unauthorized access to sensitive data. This is highly risky if you're lacking of data protection measures, things like encryption, tokenization, masking, truncation, and any sort of data protection implementations. And even in those particular distinguishes, you have many sub-implementations. As an example, for encryption, you can have transparent encryption, payload encryption, implicit encryption, homomorphic encryption, and I can continue with that list for long. The other, let's say, control, which would make it reducted or invertly it is highly risky if you're lacking of the data visibility capabilities. Now, when I'm talking about data visibility capabilities, this is mainly about having the scoping of your data, know where your data resides, and also know which data types resides in which environments and in which protection levels. But it's also about understanding the full data lifecycle in a way that would help you understand whether this data set that you now know about can be, I don't know, destroyed or being migrated or being transitioned to other places in a way that you have full governance and better understanding of where your data is, and as a result of that, better idea how to protect it. So that's the first risk. The second risk is about unauthorized access to systems and applications, and that highly risky if you're lacking of credentials protection tooling. Just to explain, when I'm talking about credentials, I'm talking about passphrases, API keys, certificates, anything that can give you and grant you access to specific resources, mainly data resources if we're talking in that particular prism. Now, if you don't have those particular systems, I know that you can think that PII or any other type of sensitive data might be more risky if they're being exfiltrated in comparison to credentials, because credentials by themselves are not sensitive data per se. But if you are going to misuse those credentials to gain access to much more massive sensitive data sets, then this risk is very, very, very high, and the business impact of it is high respectively. Moving to the next risk, this is about violating data subjects' right of access or right to be forgotten. Yeah, I think it already rings the GDPR bells and maybe some other new regulations which are now starting to pop out. But here it's highly risky if you're lacking of data visibility and orchestration abilities. Now, data visibility, I've already mentioned that part. This is about understanding the scoping, where your data resides, in which environments, with which protection levels, and also which data types are part of that area. But the orchestration part is not less important, because knowing where your data resides, or specifically PII or personal data in that sense, it's not sufficient, because if you don't have the ability to assemble all of the relevant data upon a data subject access request, or alternatively, if you don't have the ability to mark all of the personal data for deletion in all of the systems and platforms as a result of data's right of to be forgotten request, then your organization is at risk. The next risk that I would like to call out and review is the inability to respond to data breaches in a timely manner. Here it's about, let's call it a traditional incident response for cybersecurity, but the one key difference is that it's not about cybersecurity. The main focus is data security incidents or data breaches. And this is highly risky if you're lacking of data breach detection and response capabilities. And I'm talking about the right skilled people that are going to act upon each and every breach, including the triaging parts and the investigations and the usage of tooling. It's also about the processes, the playbooks, the policies, the standards, and everything that those things are going to help the people, whether those are junior people or senior analysts, to do the right thing upon an incident. But it's also about the tooling, because even with the best state-of-the-art talents in your organization acting as data security analysts, or state-of-the-art processes which were written by really skilled and experienced people, it's still not sufficient if you don't have the right tooling to have in-depth investigations so you can respond in a timely manner, either because of a regulatory requirement, you know, the 72 hours, if you like, but also if it's just because we would like, as a business, to avoid reputational risks and other type of risks which are not necessarily regulatory risks. The last inherent data risk that I would like to review now is the unauthorized data exfiltration. This is highly risky if you're lacking of data classification controls. And I think if I will try to simply describe it, I think in the world of 10, 15 years ago, there were solutions like data leakage detection and prevention, which are still exist today and sometimes even effective, but this is not enough. It might be enough for endpoints or for some specific particular misuse cases or threats. But when it comes to the new setup of the world, as I've mentioned, the new data which is spent everywhere, and new environments and cloud and on-prem and a combination of all of the above, and SaaSes, of course, that's already increased the risk of unauthorized data exfiltration. And having the right tooling, again, we're going to touch that later on, having the right tooling or the right solution to address this, not only in the traditional manner like with DLP solutions, is going to significantly reduce that particular risk. Now, About the data challenge, I touched a bit about it in the agenda. I gave a bit of a teaser, but the thing with data risks, that they are really different than any other, let's call them IT domain risk, or like endpoint risk, infrastructure risk, server risk, environment risk, because data spans horizontally, while all of the other domains are pretty much spanned vertically. And that creates a lot of challenge of how to practically effectively mitigate the risk.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and I want to continue from just where you stopped, because I think this is a very important point. This is exactly what I've seen in the last, I would say, 15 years or so after incident response of the data breaches. This is something that many security teams are having challenges to understand, that data security is different. Usually security teams are looking in a very siloed, I would say, kind of manner. Endpoint security protects endpoints. SaaS security protects SaaS. Cloud security protects cloud. But as you said correctly so, data is horizontal. Data can be everywhere. And this is especially true in the new environment, because things used to be somewhat under control. When someone asked you where your data is, you said, it's in the data. Where can it be? But now it is much different, which makes this challenge even bigger. And I want to talk a bit about why is that, and what is my suggestion of an approach to handle that challenge. So the first thing I want to talk about is data liquidity. And that is the characteristic of data that makes it so difficult, first of all, to discover and classify, but later on also to protect. And what is that data liquidity? The data acts like liquid in several different ways. First of all, it's very easy to change its shape, right? Take structured data, make it unstructured, and vice versa. And it's also very easy to move it around, to transfer it, to share it, which is an amazing thing for data. And the fact that it is so easy to do it today, much easier than it used to be, it's a good thing for each one of your businesses. However, you must take that under consideration when handling data, when discovering data, when classifying data, when protecting data, and making sure that you comply with privacy regulations. So now let's talk a bit about what is that kind of holistic data security approach? How can you handle, how can you take, we said a bit, I'm a bit tall. So what is my suggestion of doing that? First of all, discovery must reform as infrastructure evolves. That is exactly why it comes directly continuation to what Nir said about how environments are evolving today. And we cannot try to handle this kind of liquid challenge in a very siloed manner. If you are still discovering and classifying data, one database at a time, you are doing something wrong. This is prone for shadow data. It's something that I want you to think about as an exercise for yourself. When there is a change in the environment, and engineers today, it's much easier than ever to create a new database, to share data to a new external service, to a new SaaS provider, to give access to a new user. Do you know when something like that happens? If not, you have to change the approach that you are doing. Another thing is, because of that liquidity, it's super important to understand the complete data journey. And I will explain. Data is not only the bits of data that are, email address or social security number or credit card number. They have a full story behind them. Let's say, take an example. Let's say that you scan a log server looking for PII data. You can see some noddings. I guess this is something that is quite common. One thing is, okay, scanning there and saying, here I see PII that shouldn't be there. But that PII is connected, it has a full story behind it. It represents someone there. It has transformed over time. It has moved, it has an owner. And that journey, that full business context of the data must taken under consideration when looking at data, both for discovery and for risk finding. Another thing is data security is boundless, because here many people here in this room are in charge to protecting data in their environment. But here there's a big question. What is your environment? right? This is also a big change that happened. Things used to be under control. You had to know, you knew where your data can be in. But today it's easier more than ever to share it externally. Salesforce is yet another database in many aspects, or Snowflake, or any kind of external third party where your engineers or your data engineers and your employees might send data to. And today, it's not only easy to send their data, but it's also still your ownership and your liability to make sure that the data is safe. Therefore, the approach must be, again, boundless in that perspective. And one last thing that I will add here is the data security has to be centralized. It sounds almost obvious, but it definitely isn't. And it started from where we started earlier, that when you're looking in a siloed manner of data security in your SaaS or data security in each one of the databases for different teams, it is very difficult to handle the different use cases, to make sure that you comply with privacy regulations, to find risk, to set policies, or even having one source of truth of what is PII. Therefore, well, where environments are so fragmented, it is important to have that data security knowledge and control centralized in one place.
Thank you. So to wrap up the presentation that we had today about data security posture management, I'll just want to repeat and emphasize a couple of key points so you can take them today. The first one, as mentioned pretty much in the beginning, data security posture management is an approach which applies security from the data prism. I know it sounds trivial to some ears here in the room, but I think until a couple of, I don't know, years ago, or even less than that, you wouldn't see any dedicated focus on the data security incident response or the data security in specific. And now you can see more and more companies are going in that way. And I'm talking about organizations which would like to secure their data, not about any vendors which provide specific security solutions in that particular context. So that's something to remember. The other thing that I wanted to call out is about the data risks, as we've already elaborated a couple of times. Data risks are different than other security domains because they're spent horizontally, while most of the other domains are spent vertically. When it's spent vertically, it's just easier to control, easier to govern, and easier to effectively protect. With data, it's a different case, and that's why there are new types of solutions which helps you to address those particular risks. And the last thing that I would like to call out and give it to you as a key takeaway is there are various types of data risk which data security posture management solution can effectively mitigate. And that's about, if you remember the inherent data risk slide that I talked through, is it's mainly about the data visibility part. Even though the data spent horizontally, you can still have pretty good governance when you have the right visibility tooling alongside proper effective ways to apply security protection or data protection in specific in different environments, which considering different type of challenges in those environments. You know, there's a big difference between cloud and on-prem and SaaS in front of IaaS, infrastructure as a service. And I have many benchmarks like that that can explain why an effective solution should be in place. And the good news is that we're going to that place. And that's where I'm in a much better state as the head of data security in the company I work for, because it helps me to help the business to reduce risks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nir, John, for your presentation. Are there any questions? There's one over there.
Thank you very much. You mentioned data classification. I think being at the core of everything. Could you elaborate a little bit on this? I personally have had the chance to work on this complex project, have everyone agree on which classification should or not be, and the impact that it will have on the availability of the data for the rest of the company. Do you have maybe a few advices on how to proceed and how to do it in an efficient way that will not block the business eventually as well?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with the thing that I'm mainly starting with, and that's about before you're even approaching the classification challenge or data classification, try to ask yourself very clearly and brush it as much as possible. What is your purpose? What are you trying to achieve with classification? And I know maybe for some of the people in the audience, it sounds trivial, but I learned from my experience with many organizations, either small or big enterprises, that when they don't ask that question, they find themselves just absorbing what many solutions out there can provide. And the best solution out there doesn't mean that that's the best match for what you're expecting or what your business expects. So after passing that obstacle or that phase, if you like, the next thing that you would like to ask yourself is, what are you practically trying to, which type of risk you're trying to reduce? Is it about the risk of knowing your data or having better governance on your data for purely data governance perspectives? If the answer is yes, maybe there are different type of data classification solutions for you. If it's about data risk reduction, either in cloud, either at rest, either being transmitted to or from your organization, then you might want to think about different type of solutions, which have, as I called it, discovery capabilities, classifying capabilities, and also risk kind of, how do you put it? Like they can understand which exposures can be with specific calculations. For instance, how many records with that particular type we found, which is also unprotected or not effectively protected. And with that, you can also raise a risk item so people within your security org or equivalent can address it and mitigate it.
Yeah, maybe only one thing that I will add here is that the question that you're asking yourself is a question that many people are asking themselves. I mean, you're not alone. And this is where us as an industry are in the process, in a very exciting process, in my opinion, of creating an industry standard in many aspects. And events like this and many communities like this can have a significant role of defining what is PII, what is the business impact, and so on, not only for privacy regulations, but also for every other perspective of data security.
Any more questions?
Yes, I wonder if you could elaborate a bit about the unstructured data complexity. We are really, striving very hard to, how to approach the problem because, from before we had cloud solutions, we have, mitigated a lot of the, we transferred a lot of the old data into the cloud, and of course that was not the correct thing, but anyway, we did that, and we have so much terabyte now with unstructured data that includes a lot of PII. And do you have any, good tips on how to approach this enormous, I would say, problem?
Yeah, I'll start. I think that the problem or the challenges, not the problem, with unstructured data is mainly in the context of how, or so to say, how to effectively discover the data with highest precision rates, or in other simple words, minimum false positives and of course minimum false negatives. But touching a bit on the what part, what I found from my experience is that even the what in most of the cases with unstructured data is different. And I'm saying different in the context of statistically, most of the classifications or the different data types which considered as sensitive data for an organization were less with PII or any other what I call the regulatory types of sensitive data, but more of business strategic information. Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about unstructured data, and I'm not specifically talking about objects within an S3 bucket, because then it might be a bit different, but more about files, Google Docs, Microsoft Office 365 docs, or equivalent. This is unstructured data, and in the majority of the cases that I'm familiar with, you will mainly, and you're most likely to find things like business strategic information, which is more of an IP of the company and less of a regulatory thing that you would like to safeguard. Now, I'm not saying that this is an accurate science. I'm just saying that statistically, those were my observations on the what. But I think on the how part, maybe I'll let Johnny take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. Unstructured data is always a big challenge. There's no other way to describe it. However, this goes back to what I mentioned as the full data journey, or in other words, the data context. Because many times, if you're looking on unstructured data completely out of context as a stream of bits, it is one type of challenge, very hard challenge. However, if you're looking of where the data came from, looking for the metadata, many times that unstructured data has structured elements in it. It was being transformed from being structured or will be transformed to be structured. And luckily, with those new environments that are very much fragmented, they are also having a lot of information of the data beside the data itself. And when you take that under consideration, then the classification of unstructured data and finding risk around it, or it's not an easy task, but it's much more doable.
Thank you so much. Any last questions for our expert speakers? Nope. Thank you so much
Thank you
for this
And thank you,
presentation.
Victor and Daria, for a wonderful event.
Thank you. Thank you so much.